school and the community, a very important service. I'm really fortunate to work with so many students who value the importance of journalism. I'm sure you guys wouldn't be here if you weren't really passionate about the election. We're happy, we're thrilled, to be honest, that something that started as a pipe dream 2 months ago is actually unfolding on the stage tonight. So thank you for your continued support of student journalism. I'm going to turn things over to Avery and Anna. They'll be introducing tonight's guest speakers. So thank you again.
Professor in the Foundations of Democracy and Culture at Georgetown University. He is the author of 6 books. The most recent are Why the Right Went Wrong, Conservatism from Goldwater to Trump and Beyond, published by Simon & Schuster in 2016, and Our Divided Political Heart, published by Bloomsbury in 2012.
Washington, D.C.'s top public affairs firm. He is also a frequent commentator on the political landscape, widely quoted around the country and often seen on such television programs as CNN's Situation Room, MSNBC's Hardball, and Bloomberg Television's Money and Politics. He is also a columnist for The Hill.
Parker is a political reporter for the New York Times, covering the 2016 presidential election, specifically Jeb Bush and now Donald Trump. Previously, she covered Congress and Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. She started at the Times as Maureen Dowd's research assistant and has also written for the New York Times Sunday magazine. Her writing has also appeared in Glamour and the Huffington Post. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 2005 and from Whitman in 2001, where she
Matt Bai is a national political columnist at Yahoo News, where his Political World column appears every Thursday. Before joining Yahoo at the end of 2013, he was chief political correspondent for the New York Times Magazine, where he covered 3 presidential elections. His second book, All the Truth Is Out, The Week Politics Went Tabloid, was listed among the best books of 2014 by NPR and Amazon.com.
Ruth Marcus is a columnist for The Post, specializing in American politics and domestic policy. Marcus has been with The Post since 1984. She joined the national staff in 1986, covering campaign finance, the Justice Department, the Supreme Court, and the White House. From 1999 through 2002, she served as deputy national editor, supervising reporters who covered politics and other national issues. She joined the editorial board in 2003 and began writing a regular column in 2006. A graduate of Yale College and Harvard Law School, she was finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary in 2007.
Over to our editors-in-chief, Josh Millen and Jason Grill.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Grill, the online editor-in-chief for The Black and White, and I'll be leading this panel discussion along with Josh Millen, the print editor-in-chief.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you to our panelists for being here. We'd like to ask the audience to please refrain from interrupting our panelists either with comments or applause during the discussion.
Our questions are open to all the panelists and have not been shared with them prior to the event. We will start with Mr. Dion for the first question. Throughout this election cycle, the media has taken criticism from people across the political spectrum. Mr. Trump and his supporters have claimed the media is rigging the election by not being as aggressive to attack some of Secretary Clinton's scandals, while many Democrats have complained with the lack of fact-checking of Mr. Trump's comments and the heavy focus. At the same time, this election has been unprecedented in many ways and most likely very difficult to cover. If you were to give the media a letter grade for this election, what would it be and why?
I think a C, but let me just say a couple of things. First, it's really great to be back at Whitman. I have some old friends in the audience who know our kids, James, Julia, and Margot, were here, and I just want to salute Dr. Goodwin, and also all our kids are on the Black and White. So I came because of Whitman, and because other than the paper I've worked for a long time, the Black and White is my favorite paper. So I really have to thank Mr. Ruffino, Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Bowman, and Ms. Grutson, who are very important people to our family, and congratulations to Josh and Jason for running this great institution. This campaign has been more of a problem for the media than any other in my lifetime. It's probably also been a problem for the country more than any other in my lifetime. And I think there was an odd pattern to coverage of Donald Trump, where in the early part of the campaign, particularly cable television, but television in general, couldn't get enough of Trump. I remember being in our kitchen one day, and the TV was on, and there was a live Trump speech. And I said to myself, I don't want to watch a live Trump speech, so I switched to another cable channel, and it was the same live Trump speech. And I turned to Mary and I said, what do we have now, Trump state television? And I think that when you...
soon.
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, not state part, I think. When you look at the numbers on who got coverage in the first 6-8 months of the campaign, it was overwhelming Trump. I mean, the people who actually have the biggest beef with the media, I think, are Republicans, because when you compare coverage of Trump to coverage of all of the other Republicans, the ratios were 7, 8, 9 to 1. And so I think that is something that particularly television media are going to have to answer for. And I think everybody, including Trump's Republican opponents, were slow in taking seriously the possibility that Donald Trump would win the nomination. And so there's been a lot of scrutiny of Trump in the last 3 or 4 months, particularly in the last 2 or 3 months. Again, that's something Republicans might have a beef with, although since they didn't take him very seriously either, I'm not sure that they fully have grounds for that. But obviously at the end of the campaign, as more and more negative material has emerged about Trump, it does not make him or his supporters happy, but I think that's a matter of timing, and I think that Trump actually in the end has a lot to be grateful for when it comes to the media, and I think that's a problem for the media.
John Fury, thanks for having me. My only connection to Walt Whitman is Ashley. And I would say that, Ashley's done a great job at the New York Times, and you should all be very proud of all of her work.
I think we can interrupt that.
Always the first story I read in the New York Times, because it's always very highly readable and informative, which is nice for the Times. I digress. So I'm a Republican, and I would give. I don't like to give the media grades because then they want to grade me, which gets very uncomfortable. And to explain myself, I am a political hack, so I'm not really a journalist. I do write a column for the Hill newspaper, and I write a bunch of other stuff. And if you have time to go to my blog, The Fury Theory, which I have a lot, I wax poetic on all things political, and some other things on occasion. To DJ's point about Donald Trump, you're right, no one took him seriously, including the Republicans who didn't do any opposition research on him until it was too late. And I'm one of these guys I'm a party guy, so I'm a Republican. I'm not a never Trump person. I remember one time going on the Bill Maher show, and going right after, I'm sure you'll watch the Bill Maher show on Friday nights, going on right after Bernie Sanders, And that was very uncomfortable, but what I'm going to say right now is going to make me even more uncomfortable, and that is that I'm probably going to vote for Donald Trump, so don't throw anything at me. And I do that because I'm a party guy, and I respect the process. The Republican Party, no matter how screwed up it is, and it has been screwed up for quite a while, it is my party, and it's something I've worked for and tried to help for close to 30 years. And Trump has won the process fair and square, and if you say that you're not going to vote for Trump, you have a responsibility to start a third party, or vote for Hillary Clinton, which I'm not going to do. And I know that Hillary probably has a lot of supporters in this crowd and on this dais. And I would say that watching journalism and how it's evolved, the most fascinating thing about journalism is watching Twitter. And when you watch Twitter, you get this chance to see what journalists really think about politics. And I think that actually is not very good for journalists, because when they let their opinions seep through in all their tweets, I know sometimes they're trying to be informative, we now know what all their opinions are, and it's actually hard to take them seriously on anything they write. And the problem you have with journalism is that we are now entering into the world of opinion journalism, because you get more clicks with opinion journalism, and that's important. I mean, the fact is that with the internet and everything else, everyone kind of knows the basic storylines on most things. And so where journalism has evolved to is trying to get everyone's analysis. And that becomes kind of a game of opinion, and everyone's got different opinions. And I think if you look at what has happened with this frustration that Trump and the Trump supporters feel, is they can sense the opinions from all the journalists, and how the journalists kind of look down upon the voters. This is especially the case with Trump voters. And I think that they are now kind of discounting everything that comes from any journalist, and I don't think that's healthy for the field of journalism. So I think we're in a very dire situation with the field of journalism, which my dad was a journalist. I dropped out of journalism school because I didn't want to take a vow of poverty. But I do think that J schools have to look at this, look at this campaign, but also look at the rise of social media and do some really serious analysis.
So if I was grading the media on a curve, I would probably give us a B. And I think one thing that is a little lost in here is that it's been like a real challenge in terms of fact checking or how do you cover these people, because
when I covered Mitt Romney in 2012 and I covered Jeb Bush before I moved on to Trump, and typically if a candidate was saying something that was not true or that was offensive to supporters, you would write a story about it and the candidate would typically tweak their language. So if Jeb was saying, as the #1 job creator in Florida, and you wrote, well, actually that's not true, or he's cutting the statistics this way, and in fact, Texas created more jobs. The next time Jeb spoke, he was reading the news and he would say, I was a top job creator, and he would sort of modulate based on a fact-based reality. And that simply doesn't happen with Donald Trump. So we've done plenty of fact checks, and sometimes I feel like this entire campaign feels like the giant shruggy emoticon. So you'll kind of write like, Trump said this crazy thing about women, and should it matter? Or Trump said this crazy thing about blacks, or Trump said this wildly offensive thing about Hispanics, and nobody cares. And so some of it, I think, is it's not necessary, and certainly the media could do a better job, but some of the stuff is we cover it, and his core supporters simply do not care, and he doesn't care. It's kind of like in a tree lands in a forest, but Donald Trump keeps saying this stuff. Doesn't matter. So B to B minus.
Could I just very quickly amend my grade? Having heard John's encomium to Ashley, I'd still give the C overall. I think print has been better than television by a substantial margin. Obviously, I feel great about the post coverage, but I think that you need to distinguish, and print had an advantage because we have kind of limitless space when you think of online. But that's where, so I'll stick with my grade, but I do want to speak up for print folk, and then I'm sorry to interrupt Matt.
Grade inflation, it's like happening as we're speaking.
I am an easy grader.
Like all the students are out there going, why did that ever happen to me? Thank you for having me here too. I live like 3 minutes away, and my kids are too small, but they will go here someday, and I'm hoping that when they get in trouble or have their first issue with the principal, it will be remembered that I came here. And they'll be punished twice as hard. So, I don't think you can grade the media, because I think the media is a bit of a sort of not a red herring. There isn't one media, and it's really complex now. And I think that's the point EJ was just getting at. You know, I too would say broadcast and print have done very different things this cycle. I agree with EJ very much. My last book was about the collision of entertainment and politics, and I think that has reached its zenith in this campaign. I think Trump is more an entertainer, obviously, than he is a politician, in my view. And I agree entirely with what EJ was saying about the process, the coverage of the primaries. I would add to it, you know, it's not just the time of coverage. If you watch the debates, right? How many of you watched the debates in the Republican primary? So for the first time ever, you know, partly because there were so many candidates, 17 candidates, the networks, well, you know, they allowed, first of all, only like, you know, they could only put 10 people on the stage, so they used polling to decide who belonged on the stage and who didn't. And then they actually used that polling to decide where you sat on the stage. So if you were Donald Trump, you were in the middle of the stage, like we are here, and you know you were getting the first question.
Actually, so basically Donald Trump.
Yeah, the first you're polling really well. The first question in the most time, and if you were John Kasich in your second term as a popular governor of one of the most important economic drivers in the states, in the country, who've been in politics for 30 years, you were on the edge trying to work your way in and waiting 6 minutes to get a question. That sent a signal to people. There was an impact to that. And I would argue that it was mostly designed that way for entertainment value. So I think you know, the cable media, in particular the broadcast media, has an obligation to take a very hard look at their role, particularly in Republican primaries. I also agree that I think the print media by and large has been pretty good, and I think the scrutiny of both candidates and Donald Trump, you know, in particular in the fall campaign, you know, stands up pretty well. Look, all I would say is I think it's been an extraordinarily difficult campaign for a lot of us because even as a columnist, you know, I've never been a bomb thrower, I'm not a party guy. You know, I try to analyze, I try to explain more than I preach. It's very hard, I think, for a lot of us and straight reporters too, to be in a situation where you do have this candidate who is so atypical in that he is so untruthful, he is so truth resistant, he is so demagogic. He at times so undermines the principles, the constitutional principles of tolerance, principles that we identify with the country, that you do have some obligation to cover him in a different way. Because we don't have to believe, I don't believe, even as columnists, I don't believe we should identify as Republican writers or Democratic writers. I do think we owe it to readers to take an independent worldview, and I do. But you have to believe in something, at least to write a column. And the things I believe in, which are integral to the value of public service and the bedrock principles of the country, are at risk to me. And I guess my hope is that I think the media has acquitted itself in that way quite well. My hope is that we don't come away from this campaign feeling that our role has changed now in some significant way. You know, I think there were some ill effects of Watergate, for instance, I would argue, because I think journalists felt they had a different role after that scandal than they did before. And in some ways, that role distorted what the media, service the media had traditionally provided. I think this is maybe not an anomalous, but a rare situation. I think a lot of us are doing it in a different way because we feel we have some responsibility. My hope is that we're able to separate that and not change our fundamental role as sort of independent monitors of the political process.
So first,
now I'm going to have to remind the crowd again that why
wrong. So first such a nasty woman. First of all, I'm really happy to be here, not at back to school night. And I'm, you know, at this end, my daughter graduated from Whitman a few years ago, so it's really nice to be here and not to have to be worrying about her. I can say that. So I think a few months ago, I would have given the media a way lower grade, like lower than EJ's, maybe even like C-. And now I think I'm really bumping it up to a solid B, but I'll kind of go quickly through the things that I think are real problems and the things that made me raise my grade. There's two real problems. The first is, maybe more, but
But the first is I'm going to surprise John by doing something I rarely do, which is agree with him. I think that one of the fact resistant, the fact of Trump's fact resistance has unleashed something good in the media, which has been a willingness to not do, on the one hand, on the other hand, false equivalent to journalism. But it's also unleashed, and I'm an opinion writer, EJ's an opinion writer, Matt's an opinion writer, Ashley calls it straight. But it's unleashed a willingness to kind of opinionate, not just on Twitter, but to use adjectives and things, and the news pages that I don't think are appropriate, the adjectives of, disdain or whatever, are, in my world, of the opinion world, you shouldn't be able to tell the reporter's political viewpoints from what he or she writes in the news pages or on Twitter, and I think both of those things are happening. Another really bad thing that happened that drove me crazy at the start of the campaign was that because Trump was forcing us to engage in what I call bright, shiny object journalism, he was so outrageous and he was saying such outrageous things that we forgot that part of our job as reporters is to try to educate the public about the candidate's actual views. So, and we just kept it, you want to do that, you want to talk about tax policy, at least some of us do, but because he kept talking about Mexicans and women and blood coming out of you wherever, he kept kind of forcing the debate and the conversation elsewhere. And it really wasn't until about March of this year, I'm going to be a little bit self-back-patty here, Trump came to the Washington Post editorial board at the end of March, and we asked him really basic, substantive questions that weren't nasty questions, and they weren't gotcha questions, they were just basic questions like, hey, so what do you think of NATO? And his answers turned out to be so outrageous that everybody else started to get in on the substance game. So then Ashley's colleague and my friend David Sanger did a terrific follow-up interview with Trump about his foreign policy views. Why did it take until essentially he had wrapped up the nomination to get to these things? So that's the bad part of the media this cycle. The part that I don't blame the media for this cycle is that something that EJ mentioned, which is sort of Trump's state television. He was mesmerizing. If the normal laws of political gravity had been in effect, the fact that he was nonstop on CNN and MSNBC and I'm sure on Fox would have meant that he would have plummeted because he was saying such outrageous things, simply airing them. We all thought when he said that John McCain wasn't a war hero that was disqualifying, and that was about 1,500 outrageous statements ago. So I don't blame the media and the cable networks in particular for sticking with him. It's just that it didn't have the effect everybody thought it would have. Usually sunlight is the best disinfectant. It just doesn't work against Donald Trump. Here's the part where I think the media has really done a terrific job, and is finally, in the end, with wonderful journalism, like my colleague David Fahrenthold at the Washington Post, just relentlessly looking at Trump's lack of charitable contributions, relentlessly looking at his foundation, the reporting that's been done by the New York Times and the Washington Post and others about women who, I think the evidence is fairly clear, well, certainly they assert that Trump has assaulted them. That is the essence of good journalism. It is fact-based, it's backed up by corroborating witnesses or documentary evidence in the case of the Trump Foundation things. And that has been essential to helping voters understand the choices that they're facing in this election. So I'm bumping us up to a B.
By the way, Ruth's mention of adjectives. I never want to pause for my colleague. The late editor of the editorial page of the Post said something one day that has still stayed with me forever. And these were editorials, mind you, not news stories. And somebody had used a few over-the-top adjectives in an editorial. And she looked at the person and said, what adjectives are you going to reserve for Himmler? And it was her way of asking us to ask ourselves what adjectives are appropriate to this person, this situation. And I leave it to the audience whether this is the year in which we should violate the green field.
Great. All right. So next up, we have a little more of a brief question, and we're going to start with.
No, what you really want is brief answers.
It's both. It's both. So we're going to start with Mr. Feary. What do you expect for the turnout in this election, and how will it affect down ballot elections and 2018 strategies and beyond?
Well, it's, you think about it, Hillary has President Obama's turnout operation, so she should get, pretty good turnout. I think Trump has much more energized voters, so I think that he could expect, and no turnout operation. So this is really the interesting thing about this campaign. Hillary's run a traditional campaign. She has all the bells and whistles, she's got the pollsters, she's got the thousands of offices, in all kinds of different places. She's got kind of the young people already willing, excited to work. And Trump's got none of that. Trump's just got Trump and, maybe Ivanka. Maybe Ivanka's husband. And, maybe some crazy people who are waving Confederate flags. And so it's a really interesting kind of question about who's going to turn out. I think, going demographically, I don't think that millennials are going to turn out. Millennials said that they would rather see a meteor hit the world and blow up the world than vote for either of these two candidates in the poll. So they're not that excited about either of these choices. I think older white people are going to turn out because they always do for every election, and I think they're going to turn out, especially this election. I don't think African Americans are going to turn out as high as they did for President Obama. I think Hispanic voters are probably going to turn out a little bit more. And I think that, probably the most important demographic of this election is the women vote. And, I think they're pretty angry, so I think they're going to come out and vote. So, what it does historically, I think it's going to be probably 2008 levels.
So I have no particular insight on turnout. My two open questions are, one is, I was just out with Trump and I interviewed a ton of Trump voters, and there's a belief that there's kind of this silent majority who are either not being counted in the polls, or more than that, are kind of embarrassed to say or publicly admit that they're supporting Trump, but when they get at the voting booth, and privately, they'll kind of close the door and do what Trump urges them to do, which is to say, what the hell do I have to lose and vote for him? So that, I don't know if they're going to turn out or not, but that to me is the interesting question that would help them win. And then in terms of strategy, post 2016 and beyond, and this is more of again a question than an answer. But as if Trump loses, I sort of wonder what it will do, because you watched when Mitt Romney lost, and they did this really rigorous Republican autopsy, where, for instance, they said Mitt Romney alienated Hispanics. He only won 27% because he suggested they self-deport. And so they sort of took these lessons and didn't actually implement them this cycle, but they did write a report. And so I wonder what lessons you would learn from Trump, because he's just such an anomaly that I don't know what, you could probably answer this, but
I think that what
the
we
party
learned,
would draw
I think
on.
what we learned from the autopsy is that you don't learn from a bunch of political strategists, you learn from the voters. And the party has been driven not by what the political strategists want, because no political strategist in his right mind would ever want Donald Trump as a nominee. And mostly because he didn't need them. And so if you're a political strategist, it's no, I'm not my job done. But the RNC chair, all of them wanted this study to kind of be implemented to get all these different groups. And the voters don't go that way. They just did what they did, and we are where we are.
It's funny, I was thinking about it as you were asking the question. You guys are born in 2000 or something, right? So you've actually never known an election that wasn't a quote-unquote turnout election. You've actually never known an election where if somebody wasn't on TV 6 times a day saying, it's turnout, 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 just like you've never known an election where they weren't on TV all day long going, Ohio, Ohio, Ohio. That was the case before 2000, right? I don't know, not all elections are actually like that. Not all elections are turnout elections. They're not all base against base. That's always important, but before 2000, they regularly turned on other things. I'm not sure this is a turnout election. And I think Trump is probably right. His voters are probably undercounted. I think it's going to be closer than a lot of Democrats believe it is for a bunch of reasons. Not least is this, what do I have to lose? I keep comparing this election to, you've heard me do this when we were on TV. I keep comparing it to a multiplex movie theater where, you're standing there with a ticket, there's two movies showing at the exact same time. One you've seen before and really didn't like the ending and felt frustrated about it, and the other has the worst reviews in the history of movies, but you haven't seen it. A lot of people are going to the second movie, But when you look at the numbers as they exist today, taking turnout aside, he's losing by a fair margin with white college-educated voters, which Republicans virtually always carry, or ought to carry. He's losing among women by an enormous, I don't know what the latest spread is, but it's much, much higher than where Romney was. So, or recent Republican nominees. I mean, that's still too high. I mean, I guess if he gets a huge turnout of, it's better, yeah, that is better than it was. Maybe he gets a huge turnout of white men, but I think, I think there are other factors at work in this election. Basically, you really can't, the math just isn't there for Trump in a lot of these states, and so I think it's going to be hard for him, ultimately to overcome that.
We talked about whether we were going to each answer every question, so I think I'm going to exercise and discuss the plan we had, which was to say pass. Plus, I can't come up with an analogy as good as that movie theater, so.
I flag to death.
Yeah.
I agree with John on women. In fact, I think that unless we repeal women's suffrage between now and election day, Trump is going to lose, and I think that's why. Women's suffrage and the Voting Rights Act. The remaining parts of the Voting Rights Act. Just two quick things on turnout. I think one of the questions is, will there be a drop in Republican turnout? And this is an important question as it relates to the down-ballot races. Republicans who can't bring themselves to vote for Clinton don't want to vote for Trump. There was one little hint of that in an ABC poll, but it's only one poll, where over a couple of weeks there was a drop of 7% of Republicans among who are in the likely voter pool. I'm not sure saying the election is rigged is a great turnout message on Trump's part. I think there probably will be a slight decline among younger African Americans. I'm not sure there will be a big decline among African Americans. Probably millennials, I think, we don't know yet. There's been a lot of movement among millennials. But if you listen to John saying 2008, that would be a very high turnout. And I think we should remember that people turn out big sometimes out of hope, but they often turn out even more out of fear. And I think there's a lot of that going around in this election, and that could produce a higher turnout than people expect.
Okay, so the next question. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders both tapped into the anger many Americans are and have been feeling towards the political system in the country. Is this an issue we will see play out beyond this election cycle, or just the product of these candidates?
I think it's definitely an issue you will see play out after this election cycle, and sort of the best example, the best thing you can always do as a reporter that people sometimes forget is actually talk to voters. And so just a few examples from when I have talked to voters. When you hear their quotes, it just reflects sort of such a depth of despair. So one example was a woman I talked to, and I said, is there anything Donald, this was a while ago, is there anything Donald Trump could do that would make you not vote for him? And she was like, short of shooting my granddaughter, and then she kind of paused and was like, and even that, I'd probably vote for him. And so that is not something a happy person says. And then it was just
Did you ask her about her granddaughter?
Yeah. And then I was just at this past week talking to Trump supporters and kind of asking them, what would you do, and this is going to be in the story in the paper tomorrow, but what would you do if Trump loses? How would you act? What would you do? And just the language that they sort of organically used. Someone said, I think it would be the next Revolutionary War. It'd be the people against the government. We'd have to overthrow Hillary by any means necessary. Another man said he was a Bible Christian. So of course he prefers peaceful means, but he does own north of 30 guns, and sometimes reformation requires bloodshed. And so I just think that is like a deep-seated anger, fear, and frustration that is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's very scary, and I think that while I've kind of given up on the notion of Donald Trump behaving in a responsible way and not egging on his supporters by talking about rigged elections, which is, EJ has a good point, it's not great for turnout, but it's, if that's your theory of the case, it's really not great for the country. And I think it's absolutely incumbent on Republican leaders to be very clear, whatever the results of the election are, that absent something extraordinary, which is not justified by the evidence we've seen on the ground in previous elections, where the myth of voter fraud is widespread voter fraud is a huge myth from everything we know. It's really incumbent on Republican leaders to just say outright that we lost, we're sorry, if Hillary Clinton is elected, she won fair and square, we don't like her, we'll work to defeat her. 4 more years, we'll work to take back the Senate, we've lost the Senate, but this is America. We're characterized by peaceful transitions of power. We don't do 2 things that Donald Trump has done. We don't threaten to lock up our opponents if we win, and we don't dispute their elections if we lose. That said, this anger is serious, it's real, it's not going away. Most people are not going to respond to the election, and not very many people, I don't think, are going to respond to the election by taking their 30 guns to the streets. But it's absolutely clear that politicians on the left and the right are just deluding themselves if they think that the unhappiness and anger, and I would actually just think of it more as anxiety about the country, about the future of their children, about even the future of their grandchildren, which apparently they really need to worry about. That's not going to dissipate after the election. I'm really struck by thinking about 2004, which was not that long ago, when there was a guy who came and spoke at the convention in Boston about hope and change and bringing us all together in Red America and Blue America. We were a country that was hopeful and optimistic enough to be transported by this, and then to elect him twice. And now we're a country that, even if it elects Hillary Clinton, actually doesn't like her and is really angry and very despondent about the future of the country. And I'm just not quite understanding, I feel, how to put those 2 different visions of the country together, and how to get us a little bit back to the hopefulness of 2004, 2008, and away from the angst of 2016 and beyond.
I think the problem with the way we talk about anger is we act as if there is one undifferentiated blob of anger. And I count at least 4 different kinds of anger, which are quite different from each other. There is significant anger at the right end of the political spectrum that you saw against Obama, that you saw to some degree against Bill Clinton, and that has, for the most part, rallied to Trump, although some of it went to Cruz. Then there is anger among blue-collar whites, particularly in rural areas, smaller industrial towns, over the fact that their living standards have been crushed by globalization, economic change, technology. There's some overlap between that and the right-wing anger, but it's not the same thing. There is anger among many in the African American community over criminal justice issues, police issues. And then there's anger among younger progressives that nothing ever happened to the people who caused the crash of 2008, 2009, anti-Wall Street anger. Now, sometimes pieces of these overlap, but I think they are quite distinct. And yet, if you look at the Democratic primary, Clinton, the so-called establishment, I guess she is the establishment candidate, wins. And if you look at how this election looks like it's going to turn out, it will still turn out that the candidate who is not really the spokesman for all of that anger, it turns out that that candidate is going to win. Still, I think all these distinct pieces of anger out there, and the problem is that some of these folks are angry at each other, and that's what makes it so hard to pull ourselves together as a country.
But the interesting thing is that, yes, the unangry candidate is going to win, but she's going to have to deal with a lot of the anger, and she's going to be having to deal with people in Congress, particularly Paul Ryan in the House, who are sort of managing anger in their caucus and among their constituents. And
Right, and
that's going to
John's-
be very difficult.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
including managing the anger on the left as well.
And John's party is going to start impeachment articles on January 21st. I'm sorry, just careful investigations of the president on January 21st.
Well, let me say, there's an analysis of the French Revolution, what caused the French Revolution. It was called, one analysis of the collapse of high expectations. Bread prices, people got steadily more better resourced, they were eating more, they had progressing very nicely in pre-Revolutionary War France, and then the bread market collapsed and people couldn't eat, and people were really angry. And that reminds me of what happened in 2008. If you think about the 2000s, when people bought, bigger houses, especially in the suburbs, they bought, they'd go to Starbucks and have these $5 lattes, which they really didn't need. They, really kind of went well beyond, spent well beyond their means because they were trying to keep up with the Joneses. And, we are Bethesda right here, so we're really insulated from what really happened in the rest of the country. You guys have no idea. I'm from the south side of Chicago, and go White Sox, hate the Cubs. And you go to the suburbs of some places, and you still see, there's a story in 60 Minutes about Naperville, which was a up-and-coming suburb, limitless potential, limitless opportunities. Now it's a graveyard of huge houses that can't be bought or can't be sold. And that's why people are angry. They're angry because of what happened in 2008. And they blame a lot of people. They blame Bush, which is why when Donald Trump during the primary campaign specifically ran against George W. Bush and the Bush family. And it didn't matter whether he originally said he was against the Iraq War or not. What mattered was in South Carolina, during the primary, he came out against the Iraq War and said this is a bad war. And Jeb Bush said, it was a good war. My brother kept people safe. And it's this idea of this insurrectionist candidate, a revolutionary like Trump, who I don't like. I was a Jeb Bush person, I was a Marco Rubio person, I was a John Kasich person. One by one, they got their butts kicked. They got their butts kicked because what Donald Trump cleverly did is he actually talked to the American people and said what they wanted to hear. And none of those other candidates did that. I mean, Jeb Bush's campaign theme was right to rise, and I wrote a piece about right to rise. What does right to rise mean? No one has any idea what that means. Make America great? People get it. Make America great again? They really get it. Because they feel that they've lived through a time where they had these high expectations and those expectations have collapsed. Now that is, Nietzsche's right. The anger that is spread out in America is diffuse and for different reasons. But I will tell you that the anger that has propelled the Republican Party is people who thought their lives were going to get better, and because of the 2008 crash, and because of the Republican establishment, of which I'm a proud member, and the financial elite, which who all populated in New York, they conspired, and they didn't lose their money. They didn't lose their money. You know who lost their money? Those poor suckers in Naperville, Illinois. And that's why people are angry. And this populism is not going to stop. And there's only one person who gets it on the Democratic side, who scares the heck out of me. It's Elizabeth Warren. And she's unbelievable with her campaign speeches. She is a force to reckon with. On the right, the only person who was cleverly talked about it was Donald Trump. And he's the nominee, and he's going to be a lot closer to this election than you think.
Great. So, in the interest of time, because we also have questions from the audience, we're going to ask two panelists each question going forward. So this one is for Mr. Bai and Mrs. Marcus. Something that's come up already is the role that young people are playing in this election, whether or not they're actually going to turn out, how they're feeling. So what role are young people, perhaps voters between the ages of 18 and 35, and even maybe high schoolers who can't vote yet but are kind of getting involved in the political process, playing in this election cycle? And what have you seen as far as how this election has shaped their view of politics moving forward? And if they're not interested, what can be done to kind of get them interested again?
Younger voters. We've now reached a point this year, or in the latest round of polling, where the what we call the millennials, right, are a larger share of the electorate, as larger share of the electorate than the boomers, who we've all, I mean, my entire lifetime was always about the boomers. It's all, everything's about them. The millennials are surpassing them. And yet we have this bizarre moment where we have the two oldest nominees we've ever had. So the oldest Democratic nominee in history, and I think the second oldest Republican nominee. Or is he the oldest? Is he the oldest?
He's first.
Did he be the oldest? Correct.
Yeah, first elected.
First elected, right. But, oh, right, yeah, okay. The oldest, yeah, challenge.
I knew you'd catch up.
But it's, so, you know, I've written about this. I mean, there's this weird generational disconnect. I find it, you know, frankly, a little bit dispiriting that at a time when the country needs to move forward, I thought had turned a generational page in 2008, is living in an entirely different technological moment that literally affects every aspect of our lives, and it's proliferating very, very quickly. More quickly than any technological transformation in history. We are going one way or the other back in time for our leadership, and back to a generation who's had to catch up and adapt to it. And we're going to skip my generation entirely, is my bet, and go right through to the millennials. So, you know, I think there is a confusion. I mean, all of which is to say, I think millennials are not, as younger voters are not as energized, certainly as they were in 2008. I think part of it is the nominees. Obviously, a large part of it is the nominees. And part of it is their own cultural disaffection toward joining things, civic activity. I mean, they're not joining parties. I'm not joining parties. People my age aren't joining parties. The largest, fastest growing bloc of the electorate continues to be independents by a lot. And that's because more and more in the society, you just don't pledge allegiance to brands, businesses, and political parties fall into the same group. So, I mean, I think, you know, to answer the specific question, I don't think you're going to see the overwhelming young voter turnout for that reason that you saw, for instance, in 2008, and probably not as much as you saw in 2012. And I don't think the anti-Trump voters are going to drive those voters out in the same numbers. But I do think that generation is going to have a much stronger voice and much stronger impact in our politics to move it forward in the next decade.
And I think I'm going to just pluck out the part of the question about the impact on the sort of high school generation, newer voters, because one thing that I really worry about is that people of high school age in this audience will look at this election and find it normal, because it is not normal. This sort of Kardashianification of the debates, this kind of reality show campaign that we're having, where it's like, oh, okay, we're having a debate. What crazy stunt can we pull before the debate? Yes, let's have a press conference with Bill Clinton's accusers. Let's bring the president's half-brother. That'll really freak her out. And just this notion that these are the kinds of sort of normal indicia of campaign behavior, whereas, you know, it used to be when we were covering, you know, in the 1992 campaign, the thing that signified you were a serious candidate was whether you had a campaign book, and, you know, and how thick it was, and how serious you were about the issues, that you had policy platforms on an array of things, and here's my book, it's called Putting People First. And now I guess our version of Putting People First is this sort of stunt stuff. And so for young people to think that this is a normal campaign, why would they be excited about a campaign that involves two people saying, one accurately from my point of view and one not, that the other is just absolutely disqualified to be president, should be jailed, should be just completely disdained. That is not normal for presidential candidates to talk about each other that way.
How do you know it's not going to be their normal?
Well, that's the fear. That's what I'm saying. I really hope it's not their normal. I really hope we can get back to a campaign where, you know, you think Barack Obama should be elected, I think John McCain should be elected, or Mitt Romney should be elected. Well, we can all agree that it would not be a, you know, massive dangerous existential tragedy through the country for this to happen. And so, high schoolers, this is not normal. Hopefully we'll get back to just disliking each other rather than reviling each other.
This next question is for Mr. Dion, Mr. Freire, and Ms. Parker. What do you think the repercussions might be if a candidate refuses to accept the results of the election or does not give the typical concession speech if they do lose?
I feel like pandering to this Whitman audience and quoting the story by the only Whitman graduate on the panel. Ashley's story tomorrow is full of extraordinary quotations of people. And one of the interesting themes of Ashley's story is that because of a co-author, I should say, I want to honor a co-author too, is that partly because we are all surrounded by people who agree with us, and we just did a poll, PRI and Brookings, where the percentage of people who actually know somebody who's voting for the other candidate, it's surprising how many Americans don't even have a friend who's voting the other way, and that's true on both sides. And also the media consumption, where they've been led to believe, in the case of these Trump voters, that Trump was going to win, so it would seem fixed. Having said that, the concession really doesn't matter. There's nothing legal, there's nothing constitutional about it, and I think in the end, we know that these divisions will remain after the election, whether Trump if it is Trump who loses and doesn't give a concession speech, whether he gives one or not. And I actually think it's the size of the margin is really going to matter a lot. That if Trump loses by a significant margin where there aren't enough states that are very close so that he could make a case or try to make a case that this is fixed, I think that makes it a little easier going forward. But we're going to live with real divisions after this, whether Trump concedes or not. He could help by conceding. I think candidates who lose should concede, but we'll get by.
I really hope that when Hillary loses, she concedes right away.
She'll be very gracious.
We'll see.
It's not going to happen.
The only person that didn't concede right away was Al Gore, so we'll see how
Boo!
that took a while.
I share fearing that.
I don't know how this election is going to go. I think people want to prematurely already decide it, but I let the voters decide who's going to win or lose. I do think that ultimately, whoever loses is going to concede. I think this is a made-up story, made by people who are looking for stories. And I think that Trump has said these things. He said it at the debate because I think his daughter said you have to say that you're going to concede. His running mate said you're going to have to say you're going to concede, and he just said I'm just going to screw with these people just because that's kind of how I am. It changed the storylines that everyone was writing this, and Trump was able to talk about this as opposed to all the other stuff that was in the news. So whoever loses is going to concede. If Trump decides not to concede, you can bet your bottom dollar that every Republican who wants him to lose, including Paul Ryan, is going to demand that he concede, and then this story is going to go away.
By the way, today Trump said something completely innovative on this question. He said we should just cancel the election and just give it to Trump, right? What are we even having it for? So there's another view for you.
So a very quick point I would add to the story of mine that EJ mentioned is just, and you sort of got at this too, but is for all of these quotes about revolution and bloodshed and whatever, everyone I talked to was actually perfectly lovely and polite and sort of well-behaved, and I don't actually believe that any of the people I interviewed or any of the other people I could have interviewed are going to be marching on the nation's capital to, seize Hillary by military force.
The kicker on the story was really wonderful because you ended with someone who said, I would absolutely respect the result and support the next president, pray for the next president, whoever it is. What a lovely way to end the story of this election.
Just as many people like that. Those are not the quotes that may not surprise you that went viral on Twitter, but there was just as many people who said, I would accept the election, I would be disappointed, and I would go home and work to be part of this election.
Actually, can I ask you a like personally nervous or endangered when he starts to say, look at these low-life scum, and people turn around and look at you in the press pen? Maybe you could tell us something about that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I started covering, as I said, I started covering Trump after I covered like poor, sad, sweet, earnest Jeb Bush. So it was a bit of a culture shock. And I remember, I vividly remember the first time I felt unsafe at a Trump rally, and it was ages ago. And it was in New Orleans, and it was a night rally, and it was hot. And this was when all of these protesters were interrupting his events, and there was just this steady stream of protesters who were not behaving well and were getting hauled out, and they weren't leaving. They would drop to the ground and have to get dragged out, and the crowd was going crazy, and it didn't feel like, and it just felt like if someone shoved someone the wrong way, or someone got jostled, or someone said something to the wrong person, like the press is always in a metal cage in the middle of the room,
Which is not normal.
which is not normal. No, it just felt like the entire thing could just erupt in a brawl. And I remember, this sounds really dumb now, but I put my laptop down because I thought I would be more nimble if I had to run, if I wasn't encumbered by my Mac Air. So that was the first time. And then I will add that Trump always singles out the media, and he always says, look at the despicable scum, and look at whoever, and whatever. I never really feel unsafe then, but what's happened recently, which has changed a little bit, and so he says this, and the entire crowd at his cue will turn around and boo us and jeer us and whatever, fine. But now, as we enter sometimes these big arenas, they'll start, without him even prompting, booing and heckling and hissing and chanting CNN sucks. And Jose Del Real, a friend of mine who works for the Washington Post, we were leaving a huge arena in Scranton area, so we're sort of like walking out while the speech is still going on, one of these tunnels that the athletes used to run in and out of, and Jose and I both realized that we were sort of like, as we were walking out, we were bracing for something to be thrown at us, or for not walking too close to the supporters because we didn't want to get punched, which is just not a way I ever thought of when I covered Mitt Romney.
Can I give a contrasting story? One of my favorite experiences in the campaign was in 2008 at the Sarah Palin rally. At the end of the 08 campaign in Shippensburg State in Pennsylvania. And I got there a little early and she was late, and I ended up interviewing all the people around me, and there was this really nice man with his little boy, and we talked about stuff, and we talked about politics, and so we got very friendly, and then Palin starts, and Palin then ritually did her ritual of attacking the mainstream media, and this incredibly nice, very conservative Republican turned to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and said, "I'm sorry." And he meant it. And it was the sweetest thing, one of the sweetest experiences I've ever had in a campaign. But that's the opposite of this.
And I've certainly experienced the opposite too.
Great. So we are going to get to one or two audience questions now. This is for any or all of the panelists to just jump in. The question here is there ever a concern that addressing gaps and scandals has crowded out policy coverage?
Matt Bai, this is your meet. This is...
I have a book for you. I should have brought and sold it half price. Yes, I'm deeply concerned.
I think it's Amazon.com.
This is my whole I'm deeply concerned. And look, when I say to Ruth, only half joking, but like, how do you know it's not their normal? This is what I worry about. I don't worry about. I should have worried about Trump. Clearly, I didn't think he was the nominee. I was one of the people who was wrong about that. I don't worry about him inciting rebellion in the country. What I think is that Trump represents the apotheosis or the rise of a long trend in American politics. Now, understand, I was a national correspondent at Newsweek. It was a very big magazine. You can look it up.
A very big what?
I was a national correspondent in 1998. I was very young. One of the first stories I covered for a year was a guy named Jesse Ventura, a professional wrestler who got himself elected governor of Minnesota. He was a pretty serious governor. He assembled a very good team and did some things for Minnesota that I thought were quite good. But that, my point being, there's a long line, and I write in my book about this moment in 1987 that I feel was very pivotal, but this long line of sort of the collision of celebrity and entertainment, personality and politics. to the exclusion of policy. And by the way, that is not, do not listen to politicians when they tell you, oh, if we could only talk about the policy, but the media is obsessed with celebrity. They are just as complicit. You know, a couple of months ago, I asked Hillary Clinton's campaign, I said, look, you have a signature program. In your first 100 days, you want to spend $270 billion on infrastructure. I would like to sit with the candidate, and I would like to talk about the infrastructure plan. I've been reading about it. I care about this. I won't ask you anything about email. I won't mention the name Donald Trump, but I want to talk about your signature thing. She wouldn't do it. And they never do. They always say they want to talk about policy, but find me the in-depth policy interview with someone other than like some local TV. You know what they said to me? They said, this actually, it's not true she doesn't talk about it. This came up in her interview with the Buffalo News. What? Right? So like, you know, no offense to the Buffalo News, what do you mean it came up? Like, it's a major topic of her campaign. So, I'm digressing, but, you know, we do talk about, it's not just scandal, but it is anything entertaining, anything cinematic, anything with narrative. And there's a terrific book by a guy named Neil Postman, which you should read about this, called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And my fear is that there's a whole bunch of celebrities, athletes, movie stars, billionaires, Mark Cuban, whoever else, are sitting home during this campaign and watching Donald Trump on television and thinking to themselves, I can do that. And I actually want to do things for the country. And I can actually dress it up as sounding legitimate, and I don't have to act outrageous. I can actually put on a suit and act like a serious politician. I can play the role. And I think we are about to enter a period of where entertainment, personality-driven politics isn't the sideshow or the rising trend. It's the coin of the realm. It's going to drive our politics, and the party system is going to be upended. And either you're going to see independent candidates, and I believe in independent presidency within a couple of cycles, or you're going to see more like Trump and to some extent President Obama, people taking over national parties. I mean, what has Donald Trump done? He has supplanted the Republican Party of the United States, the party founded by Abraham Lincoln, with his family and his corporate brain. That's what his convention was. He basically threw the party out and put his family in. If he wins this election, somehow, because John cast the vote and he wins by one vote, and I believe it will be close, the most influential advisors in his West Wing will be his children. And there's no reason to think otherwise. There's no one else who will fill that mandate. So, and they know nothing. Ivanka Trump may be a lovely person, but she designs handbags. She does not design domestic policy. So, you know, I think the implications of this collision, this intertwining of entertainment and politics that students here, that you all have grown up with, is very profound and something we need to focus on and think about, something the media needs to grapple with as well. Sorry, go on, like that.
You know the definition of a liberal is someone so open-minded that he won't even take his own side in an argument. And I recently read an article that challenged my view of this question, because on balance I'd be inclined to say, you know, in many ways agree with Matt, although I don't think for various reasons we'll have an independent president anytime soon. But this article argued that for all our frustration with this election, we actually have, as a country, not in the best way, put a lot of important issues on the table. Immigration, how people should deal with people who are not like them, sexual harassment, think of how much, and sexual assault, think of how much we've actually engaged in debate on that because of Trump. Tolerance, the economic problems of people who've been ignored, trade. It's in this very defective way, we have put a lot of issues on the table for the country. And while, again, I'm not even sure I'm comfortable with this view, because there are many things about this campaign that I think have been destructive, perhaps by servicing all these issues, we might, in the long run, be better off. I just toss that out there. The only thing I think we are definitely not better off for is the normalization of certain kinds of prejudice, and that really does worry me, that we pull that out. And when you see the anti-Semitism against anti-Trump journalists, or all kinds of things that can be said, I think we are better off when we are polite to each other. But this other view that we've actually put serious issues on the table, maybe in the end, if we, depending on what we do with all of this, we could be better off in the long run.
Maybe accidentally we put serious issues on the table, but in terms of the question of whether we've drowned out discussion of policy, I would think of it this way. What voters out there, even the ones who are voting for Hillary Clinton, could tell you anything in any detail whatsoever about what her vision is for the country or what she wants to do in the first 100 days? If only you had gotten your interview about infrastructure, that might be different, but they can tell you that she doesn't want to build the wall like Trump, but I really doubt that she has conveyed or either tried to convey or managed to break through all the shouting in order to convey a sort of substantive vision of policy. And I think that's bad. I was just having this argument in my office about the use of the word mandate. Does Hillary Clinton have a mandate? How can she have a mandate if we haven't talked about what her policy is?
She got a margin. She can't have a
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Oh, good line.
Next question.
Okay, so our final question is for all of you. If you could give the audience one thing, one piece of information to leave them with about this election. We can start with you.
We're journalists and hacks who don't have any information to get back. No, go ahead.
Listen, I think that there's a lot of people depressed about this election, and there's probably a lot of reasons for it. But you know, this is our process, and you know, it might be slightly broken, but everyone has a chance to participate. And you know, there are not only the top of the ticket, but very good people running for office all the way up and down the ticket, even at the local level. And you know, your job is to participate. It's not only to vote the way you vote, but find out, you know, what you're going to do, what these candidates really believe in, and actively participate. I think the one thing that has been interesting about this election is people now can participate in all kinds of ways other than just give money, and that's one of the great things about social media. It's also one of the worst things about social media. And I think that what you see on Twitter, if you're on Twitter can be a very, very dark place. And I've got it from both sides. I've got it from Trump supporters, I've got it from Hillary supporters, I've got it from, you know, all kinds of other people who think I'm a big jerk, and they're probably right. But you know, that is the thing about this democracy, is that you have an opportunity to participate in all kinds of different ways. And if you don't participate, that's your own fault.
I mean, you know, here's an interesting fact. Courtesy to credit to my old newspaper, Ash's newspaper, which did a tremendous analysis of the primary voting. I think this is one of the most important and overlooked statistics in the entire campaign. They found that the percentage of people who voted in the primaries, Republican or Democrat this year, was something like a quarter of the electorate. Not overly impressive. The percentage of people in America who pulled the lever either for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, both candidates, in the primaries was 9%.
Oh my God.
Fewer than 1 in 10 American voters voted for these two people to be on the ballot. I submit to you that we have a systemic problem for the reasons I talked about earlier, that people aren't joiners, that party activists are a dying breed, that people don't go down to the local party club, there isn't even a local party club anymore, that we have a relic of a system that is too little representative of the broad center of the electorate, but more than that, too easily exploited and manipulated and hijacked. And we have gotten a premonition of that this year on the Republican side. I think there's more to come in the future. And I think, you know, there are inspiring things about our politics and things to be hopeful about, but I do think we need a systemic evaluation of the way we choose our leadership, because the primary process is built for an age in the 1940s or 50s where everybody belonged to a party and everybody voted, and the primaries basically created, even on the local level, not just on the presidential level, the primaries basically gave you candidates reflective of the broader American electorate. That is not happening anymore, and I think it's a deep-seated systemic problem.
We have a system where the politicians on the left and the right, Republicans and Democrats, are better people, more serious people, more civic-minded and patriotic people than their institutions are allowing them to be. And we need to think through, and sort of builds on what Matt had to say, we need to think through ways in which we can allow them to do what they actually want to come to Washington or to state houses across the country to do, which is to sort of build on their vision of what could make America, if not great again, better. And I think we need to remember, if he is not elected, that Donald Trump is not the embodiment of American politics and American politicians. He's really, I mean, he would say that also. He's the antithesis of American politics, and I hope that if we as a country reject him, we will also be reminding ourselves that what is important to reject it out of.
Two observations and hope. One is just notice how different the campaigns are for every other office on the ballot from the presidential campaign. And while the presidential race is clearly affecting these other races, and Democrats in suburban districts hope it affects it a lot, there are people running for other offices who are not running the way Trump is and the way that affects the campaign. I think that's interesting. The second thing is Bernie actually raised enormous amounts of money from small contributors, and we've seen how money can be political money can be democratized, and I hope different people build on that over time. And the last thing I want to say is that the hat that I would wear is one that says "Make America Empathetic Again." What's really striking, and Alan Abramowitz, a great political scientist, has written about this, is the rise of negative partisanship. And the large groups of Americans just don't understand each other anymore. And we've always had class divides, and we've always been far apart. I'm sorry, there we go. But I don't think we've been we've had this lack of understanding in a long time. And I just hope we come out of this trying to understand each other better. That sounds terribly Rodney King of me, but I do think a country that is this divided is going to have trouble governing itself. John?
You guys kind of look like, having gone to Women, you guys feel like a room of voters, but I would sort of echo what John said and say vote, because when I talk to all of these campaigns, like the level at which they can micro-target is stunning. So, they can find that, there is a half Chinese, half Hispanic, left-handed Prius driver and target to them. And,
saw that guy.
And when you look at who Hillary is talking to, and you look at who Trump is talking to, and who they're tailoring their policies to, it's people they expect to vote for them. So if you don't vote and you don't become part of the demographic group that they feel that they need to win over to win the primary or win whatever, they're going to factor you in less to their policies. So,
Great, so that concludes the questions for tonight's panel. Before, I know Mr. Confino might want to say a few things, but before he does, I just wanted to thank you all, and we, as the Black and White, would like to thank you all for coming. Thanks to all